Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Stockholm. I am Jagannath Panda, head of the South Asia and Indo-Pacific Center at the Institute for Security and Development Policy. We are glad to have this webinar, which is second in the round of the three seminars we are hosting in collaboration with the Embassy of India in Sweden. This webinar is a part of our research project that we are carrying with the collaboration with the Embassy of India, titled as India-Sweden Ties as a Gateway to India-Nordic Engagement. Today, we are delighted to have with us a fantastic set of experts who have studied some of these areas about India-Sweden economic ties, India-Sweden and Nordic economic and trade ties. We'll be privileged to have them and listen to their insights. But before we start today's webinar, let me very briefly introduce about our distinguished guest here, Sri Rakesh Kumar Tiwari, who is the Charge d'Affaires at the Embassy of India. Mr. Tiwari is a career diplomat from the Indian Foreign Service. He's a senior officer currently posted in Sweden, in Stockholm at the Embassy of India. Prior to this, he served as the Undersecretary at the BIMSTEC division in the Ministry of External Affairs. He has served in Myanmar for quite a bit long time and knows Burmese language, has also done extensive research and he has learned the Burmese language and extensive research on the linguistic evolution of the Burmese language, tracing development from ancient Sanskrit through Pali. We are great to have you, Mr. Tiwari, and we are really thankful for the Embassy of India to have this webinar with the collaboration of ISDP. Before we start this webinar, maybe I would invite you to say a few words to kickstart this webinar. Over to you, Mr. Tiwari.
Thank you very much, Mr. Panda. So may I address now?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Namaskar, good afternoon, and good evening. All the esteemed guests, all the respected speakers and friends, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Building New Supply Chain Connections. India, Sweden, and Nordics. That's a very specific topic today we are going to discuss. A special welcome to our all speakers and participants joining us from different parts of the world, bringing their expertise and valuable insight to this very important discussion. India and Sweden share a strong and very evolving partnership that built on a pillar of innovation, sustainability, and mutual growth. As global supply chain undergo rapid transformation in nowadays, it is essential to explore new avenues of cooperation that enhance resilience, efficiency, and sustainability. The Nordic region, that is known for its advanced technology, green solution, strong industrial capabilities, while India offers a very dynamic market, a skilled workforce, and robust manufacturing ecosystem. So we can say by fostering deeper connections, we can create a synergy that not only strengthen our bilateral ties but also contribute to global economic stability. We have seen in last 2-3 days, and it's a very recent event that Foreign Minister of Sweden is in India to attend it, Russia and Iran, where she discussed many high-level some not only high level, but she went for a very productive discussion and opening of new business Sweden office in Sweden, in Mumbai, and many other initiatives. So I hope today in this platform, in this webinar, we will discuss a lot of things and a lot of learning for all of us. And I hope this webinar provides a platform to discuss emerging opportunities in trade, technology, and sustainable supply chains. I look forward to insightful discussion that will shape the future of our collaboration between India, Sweden, as well as between India and Nordic countries. Thank you all for being part of this dialogue. I wish you a productive and engaging session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Tiwari. Again, that was a very useful remarks at the beginning of this discussion, and I think all credits goes to the Embassy of India and also the Swedish Embassy in India and the Indian Embassy here in Sweden for playing a critical role in terms of enhancing India-Sweden, India-Nordic ties. Um, Let me briefly introduce our esteemed panel today. We have a rich set of experts. We have Dr. Perstom. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Mahavi Minerals AB, a junior mining company in the Nordic regions. Postam is a docent in the innovation processes of the mining and steel industries. He holds a Doctor of Science degree in industrial management, a Master in Science in Material Science and Metallurgy. And most importantly, Dr. Storm is a fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences and several professional societies. For ISDP, it is also our privilege that Dr. Postam is our member in the ISDP board. Uh, then we have Dr. Sari Arohavn, a well-known name in the European circuit, currently a senior geopolitical advisor for Business Finland and an associate fellow at the Royal in United Services Institute in London, that is RUSI, a well-known think tank. Sari is also a visiting researcher at the University of Helsinki. She obtained her PhD in general history in the field of international relations from the University of Helsinki. She specializes in the Chinese politics, society, and history. I had the pleasure of listening to her on many forums, particularly on China. So it would be very interesting to hear her remarks about how she looks at China factor in the India-Nordic engagement, particularly when it comes to supply chain networks. Then we have Miss Carolina Lislo Galfi. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but we are privileged to have you. Carolina is the Secretary General of the NGO We Planet in Sweden. Um, she's an award-winning social entrepreneur. She co-founded two businesses. One is Genovate, which sells organic products from local bead shop. And also she's involved in many biological related research programs and issues. Um, she's also a advisory board member of Kunglinka Bibliotecata, uh, and we are privileged to have her more to discuss about the non-governmental organization sides of this engagement between India, Sweden, and India-Nordic. Then we have Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. He is the chief coordinator of Dakshin, the Global South Center of Excellence. And he's also a professor in European Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was awarded the John Monnet Chair by the European Commission and has coordinated John Monnet Center for Excellence in JNU. He is the book series editor of Europe Asia Connectivity and also the co-editor of Asia Europe Journal. You will find him quite well known in the European circuit as he keeps on traveling and speaking in various forums. Last but not least, we have Mr. Rajesh Thomas. He's the managing director at Accenture Nordics, overseeing growth and business developments for the retail, consumer goods, and manufacturing sectors. He possesses more than 20 years of experiences in the Nordic regions, specializing particularly the large-scale business chains, business transformations using technology, data, artificial intelligence across various enterprising functions, covering the supply chain networks between India and Nordic regions. He has also, he has been also with the Nordic head at Wipro and Tech Mahindra. So we are privileged to have you all distinguished speakers. So I'll just start with a note that Charge Day Affairs, Sri Tiwari was mentioning about trade and technology. I think one good beginning that has come to the forefront between India and Nordic is that I think because of the establishment of EU-India Trade and Technology Council, things are becoming deep and deeper, and we are discussing much more serious issues today, particularly in the post-pandemic world. As we know, that between India and Sweden, probably we are connected at three levels. One is at the bilateral level, one is at the Nordic level, which is at the India-Nordic engagement level, and the other one is at the India and EU level. So India and Sweden's are partners are three structural levels. But to advance India-Sweden relations to the next level, particularly to the India-Nordic level, and to have a much more serious collaborations, we need to discuss in deeper context what are the areas that could be the boon for this relationship, and how should we look at the future trade and economic ties between India and Sweden, factoring India-Nordic engagement and India-EU engagement, particularly in the trade, technology, digital arena, also on energy and renewable energies. In order to discuss some of these issues, including the new supply chain issues, I will invite each one of you to share your thoughts. So first, I will invite Postam to share your thoughts about what do you think how India and Sweden could advance their supply chain networks, trade and economic ties, not only currently, but also in a near distance future. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. It's a pleasure to be invited here and to address such an eminent audience. I myself come from the background of raw materials and energy, and I think once we really start with pointing out the Indian situation right now. India is one of the major suppliers in the world when it comes to raw materials, and it is one of the biggest mining countries in the world. I think that is a very important thing. It's actually the second largest steel maker in the world right now, and India has been contributing quite substantially to the growth of the Chinese steel industry, which is by far the world's biggest at this point. But as India is now expanding its own steel industry, the major part of the raw materials, iron ore and such, are now being used in India, and I'll come back to that in my initial few comments here. So India has a very major standing in the raw materials sector. It is the fourth largest iron ore miner. It is on top when it comes to special minerals such as barite and bentonite. I'll come back to that shortly. So India is an important raw material country. Now Sweden is in a European setting quite substantial. We're one of the major mining countries in Sweden, in Europe, but we are home to some world-class equipment manufacturers like Epiroc, Sandvik, and also in the Nordic countries we have FLSmidth and Metso, who are world-class suppliers when it comes to the next step, the processing step. FLSmidth, by the way, has been active in India for quite some time, starting actually in cement production in India many years ago. What we are seeing now is that both in terms of FLSmidth, Epiroc, and Sandvik equipment manufacturers have been active in production in India for many decades at this point. And even though there are some linkages between India and Sweden when it comes to special minerals, I mentioned bentonite, which is used in production of iron ore pellets, going into green steel production, which is something that is very highlighted right now. I think the main body of interactions between Sweden and India is probably on the equipment and knowledge transfer side. As a side note, the knowledge transfer between Sweden and India started actually in the mid-19th century, where some Swedish engineers went to India to try to transfer some knowledge in the Swedish blast furnace technology at that point. But I think here is somewhere where we do see the need for and the continuous growth of collaboration and interaction. So equipment manufacturing R&D collaborations when it comes to raw materials and energy is probably one of the key issues going forward. Now, I mentioned green steel, and the decarbonization of the world steel industry is something that is a very hot topic and needs to be done in order to create a non-fossil economy. The steel industry itself is home to about 7 to 8% of all CO2 emissions in the world. And here, India is a country where there's a lot of direct reduction technology being carried out. Presently, it's been so for many years, but that is basically based on low value coal, and that now needs to shift over to either high grade raw materials such as higher grade iron ore, which exists to a large extent in India, but also probably to hydrogen. And as you know, I hope some of you know, there's been a lot of work on hydrogen reduction of iron ore in Sweden. So I think there's also a very poignant point where further collaboration and further interaction will come about. And producing hydrogen for different applications will need an expanded amount also of technology, but also of energy infrastructure. So we see possibilities for an increased collaboration here, both on the raw material side, on the knowledge and R&D side, and on the equipment supply. And as I said, that's been going on for quite some time. And I think that's, I know, for example, that Sandvik has an R&D center in India and has had for a long time. So the fundamentals are there. And the Indian raw materials sector is shifting over, of course, into the Indian industrialization. But there might be opportunities both for interactions from Sweden to India, or from the Nordic countries to India, and from India to the Nordic countries. I think I'll stop there and leave the next comments for the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that overview. Carolina, you would like to share your views about this?
Thank you, Dr. Panda, for including me in this important discussion. So my name is Carolina Lisle-Julfi. I know it's very difficult to pronounce. It's not only weird to other language than Swedish, but even in Swedish, it's not a common last name. So I represent We Planet, an international NGO. So that means we work with non-governmental organizations, and we have member organizations within 18 countries at this moment. So for us, it's very important to make sure also to have the grassroots perspective with us in all educational campaigns and topics that we highlight. Because it's if you want to achieve change, it's also important to have the people with us. So as we explore to build this new supply chain connections between India and the Nordic countries, I would also like to emphasize that sustainability is not just an environmental consideration. It's a strategic advantage that enhances resilience, it reduces risks, and it also creates premium market opportunities. So I hope we all observe how sustainable practices in key sectors like mining and agroforestry can create supply chains that is not only environmentally responsible, but also more stable and profitable. So the complementary strengths of India and the Nordic countries create a unique opportunity to develop the supply chain models that can address shared challenges while also advancing the strategic interests. So what I will share today hopefully will demonstrate how sustainability principles, when you integrate them into the supply chains from the beginning, create mutual benefits from or for both regions while reducing resource consumption and increasing the climate resilience and opening also new markets and opportunities. So this isn't about choosing between the economic growth and the environmental protection, but it's also to recognizing that today's in the world of today, the most competitive supply chains will be those that are also the most sustainable. So I will hopefully continue on the sustainability side for the supply chain in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really objective and a nice overview again. Sari, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the earlier introduction. I won't introduce myself more than that. So on the general note, I think due to the geopolitical shift and technological changes and decarbonization, energy transition efforts, Nordics are experiencing real pressure to enhance supply chain resilience and economic security. On the other hand, India, with its vast industrial base, skilled workforce, growing technology sector, is really well placed to support and partner with Nordics in addressing these challenges. A lot of our challenges in increasing resilience is due to the dependencies, particularly on China. So meanwhile, there are some evidence that China intentionally or not intentionally is actually trying to hinder India's role or rise as a manufacturer powerhouse. So not only can India support and partner with Nordics, but we too can have a role in maybe alleviating some bottlenecks coming from China that impact India. I will shortly address these bottlenecks that can be connected to China that India needs to tackle with, and where Nordics could play at least a partial alleviating role. So what we have seen recently is kind of an increasing evidence on how China is working to hinder the growth of Indian manufacturing, actually to prevent India from becoming a significant rival in the future. And this is kind of a little bit funny, considering how consistent China has been accusing of United States preventing China's rise, and now China is in a way trying to secure its manufacturing base against rising rivals. So some of these actions are indirect and sometimes direct. Sometimes it is a collateral damage that is trying to hinder especially the manufacturing area growth. These include export restrictions on critical materials which can disrupt supply chains. These can include bureaucratic delays aimed at slowing basically the India's ascent as a global manufacturing alternative. So India's import are approximately 15% of its total imports from China. Please correct me if I have wrong information, but it's somewhere there, and its reliance in critical material inputs makes these restrictions impactful. And what is behind here is basically that is influencing, although Nordics, not just India, but many other countries as well, is China's strategy that has been creating actually dependencies on other countries that then can be leveraged, even weaponized politically. So I think both India and Nordics share the need actually to try to decrease these dependencies and diversify their supply chains. So there's behind this at the moment is, of course, China's policy of concentrate on manufacturing, becoming a green manufacturing power. And this is particularly concerning in Europe because that can also kill our industries by pouring these subsidized cars and particularly green industries components to the European markets, and it's difficult for our industries to compete. At the same time, what is behind this trend is, as I said in the beginning, there is increasingly concern in China that international companies are pivoting away from its manufacturing ecosystem in favor of of India and Southeast Asian nations. So supply chains are definitely on the move. There's lots happening because of these drivers on the background, and we can discuss more about these in the coming hour. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Sachdeva. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Panda, and thank you for inviting me to this very useful discussion. I'll just, after listening to first three speakers from the Nordics, since I follow a couple of things, I follow Europe as a professor of European studies, I follow India-EU relations and India's relations with bilateral relations with various countries. And now as a chief coordinator of Global South Center of Excellence, which was set up in 23 by the Prime Minister of India, I'm also having a lot of conversations with Global South. We have already at the Global South Center of Excellence, have now agreements with close to 140 think tanks in about 85 countries. So we are having different kind of conversations with all of them. But here I'm just going to kind of bring all my understanding of different issues to the topic today, what we are discussing. In the next 3 or 4 minutes, I mean, India was always a big country. India was always a democracy. But what has really changed, I would say, in the last 25 years, and more so in the last 10, 12 years, is sustained economic growth. It may not be 3 decades of 10% plus growth of China, but still reasonable 6.5 to 7% growth for almost 30 years. Now that particular growth has its own consequences. It has, as a result of that, you will find India has now, signed trade agreement with large number of countries and also having different connectivity partnerships and many, many other things. Close to 40 countries we have strategic partnership today. India has also moved away from non-alignment to something else, which we are trying to work out with everyone. Now, here, as Professor Panda mentioned, when we are looking at India or Sweden, it has to be looked at obviously at 3 different trajectories. You look at bilaterally, certain thing has to be done bilaterally. Then some of the things we are also trying to work regionally within India-Nordic Summit or other forums, or even Nordic-Baltic kind of areas. Then, of course, large number of things, particularly as far as trade, investment, technology things are concerned, they also have to be looked within the India-EU context. Now, there is obviously clear recognition within the European circles that India is important. Whatever the numbers have, 4th largest economy or 3rd largest economy in the years to come or whatever. But the question is that it's still one of the fastest growing G20 economy and likely to be in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So obviously it can provide certain opportunities. And from Indian point of view, trade investment has always been a very important part of India-Europe relations. And when India is looking at its own modernization now in the next 10, 20 years, I think it's very clear recognition within India also that Europe and European countries, and in certain cases, specifically Nordic countries and Sweden, has to play. There is very specific role for them as well. Still a very important market for India. If I look at the numbers of all trade, companies in India, their financial technical collaborations are with large number of European countries. So that recognition is there from both sides. Now, as a result of this, all kind of things are already there in place because at the policy level, there is a recognition. To facilitate those things, although, I mean, things are in place, but still we haven't really delivered on many of those. I mean, we talk about trade agreement. We have been negotiating with the EU since 2007. It's 25 now. When the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, with all the commissioners, was in Delhi just a few weeks back, they said, okay, by the end of this year, they have given a kind of direction to their negotiators. We must conclude by the end of this year. I hope this happens, but we have also seen deadlines earlier also, many, so we don't know. But at least there is a recognition at the political level. Then many of the things what you're talking about, resilience and supply chain resilience, you also have the Trade and Technology Council. Within that, I think all those things have already been listed there. Then even looking different alternative connections between India and Europe. Yesterday, the whole day I was with the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Now, all those kind of talks are on. Whether something will come out of this or not, we still have to see. But there is a clear recognition. But what is really happening today, the way the geopolitics is moving. Now, I think all two, three speakers they mentioned, and particularly from Nordics, I think it's quite understandable. We talked about decarbonization. So this is one is decarbonization. For many years, the Europeans were talking about de-risking, earlier decoupling from China. And then after that, you also start move away, not just de-risking and something else, much more than that with Russia because of the Ukraine thing. So you have moved away, joined NATO and many other things which has happened. But now you don't know, from de-risking from China to Russia, you also might have to de-risk now from the United States, the way things are happening. So those things are really moving. But at least, I mean, there was a bit of a disappointment, I would say, in the European circles for some time. The way Indian perceptions about Ukraine were different. But I think the way things have really moved now, there is a even greater appreciation of the kind of position India took. Ultimately, you have to resolve this conflict in one way or the another. Then only I think it's beneficial for everyone. So, I mean, there is a broader things which are moving in the direction of India and the Nordics and Sweden work together. And clearly, India provides an opportunity to many, many European and Swedish and Nordic companies. But things are different. When we talk about energy transition, moving away from fossil, I mean, India is moving its own energy transition. You are moving your own energy transition. You are moving away from fossil. We are not really moving away from fossil in that sense because energy demand is growing and per capita energy consumption is so low that ultimately demand is going to go up. So what we are doing is that we will continue to use many of coal and different kind of sources, but maybe many of the new investments which will come perhaps will go more into the other sectors. And there, I think India has worked very closely with many Europeans, and also the nuclear is one option with Sweden has certain technologies. And the India can provide really a huge scale on some of the technologies which have been developed in the Nordics. So there is a possibility that some of the things what you are doing in Sweden or Nordics, and that can be scaled up in a very, very huge scale in India, and that can also benefit later on to many other countries in the global south, not just only in India, because what India is really doing in India, we are also trying to share those experiences in many other countries in the global south. And every day I have conversations with those countries. And every country is also doing its own way. I mean, you look at many countries in Africa, Latin America, or in Asia, they are doing different kind of experiments, particularly in the agriculture sector or also in the digital, I mean, the public digital public, I mean, public digital public DPI, the digital public infrastructure. But one thing, in fact, many of them they also admire about India is, or they are trying to learn something in a sense that what India has really done at the kind of scale. I mean, the way India has really created that ecosystem of DPI in India, where you start with your identity, and there is a also like the Nordics. I mean, this is something interesting that even in a country like India, where most people are not very normally are skeptical about what the government schemes and government things like any other developing country. But there is a faith in the government's DPI. People are willing to share their information. So people have their physical identities, and those physical identities are now linked with your financial transactions, your financial transaction. They have also been linked with your hospital records. They have also been linked with your all kind of government subsidies. And many, so it means the kind of ecosystem which has been built, which is I think very, very cost effective, almost free actually, and it's a public good. Uh, so that ecosystem, many other countries of the global south are also willing to, I mean, India is willing to share with all of them. And and the digitization in agriculture, digitization in your health services, digitization in many other sectors, which is happening in a developing country. So we are not talking about this is happening somewhere in Sweden or in the Nordics. The cost is almost zero. And that it's open source kind of system which India is willing to share with many other countries. And there, in fact, if Nordics can really come somewhere or Sweden, that is a really very important thing, because then certain technologies which you are developing, which could be very useful, then we can also share with many other countries in the world as well, not just only. But so all the targets, what Carolina and others you're talking about, all the climate targets of 2030 or SDGs or anything else. Now, unless India moves, most of these targets are not going to be met. So India is very crucial in achieving all those targets, and India is trying to do it, has its own ambitions, but things are different. You mentioned about raw materials. India has raw material, but they also have ambitions to become manufacturing hub, not just only providing raw material for others. Similarly, uh, as India is growing, there are certain resources and defense. I mean, there are strategic situations are complicated in our part of the world, so the defense expenditure may also go up, and we also have to build our own defense capabilities. And then I think country like Sweden could be very, very useful. And that's why in that context, one also need to understand India's relations with Russia. And we are anyway diversifying. So in that diversification process, Sweden anyway has been very important partner in the past as well. So it has a certain role. But just last point before I finish, and one more thing where I think India and Nordics really have to work together, and I would say India, Nordics, and Europe have to work together. The two or three areas, and Sari, you mentioned about China. Uh, Whether you look at artificial intelligence, you look at quantum, you look at all the green vehicles. They are one of the leaders today, whether we like it or not. You have United States, you have Chinese at the top, and then others are quite far behind, including Europeans. But there are definitely capacities in Europe, and there are certain capacities in India as well. So if Europe and India have to now look at this challenge, because because earlier you thought United States is also your transatlantic partnership and very close partners, etc., etc. But now, as I was saying, de-risking is not really for you only from Russia and China, etc. You also have to de-risk at some extent also from the United States as well. So it's a very different kind of situation in which I think we can really work. And unless we really work and come closer to those, because these are the future technologies. Uh, in fact, I was in Moscow. I went to their quantum center. I saw what they are doing. And they themselves told me that, we are quite far behind China and the United States, very, very far behind. In fact, and similarly, also situation is also in France and in UK, etc. And I think this is really a challenge. for us in India and Europe and in the Nordics to do something in those future technologies. The ecosystem somehow exists, but it has to work together. And this is what I think we really need to do. Thank you.
That was excellent. I think you covered a lot of areas from defense capabilities to digital infrastructure to AI, quantum. We'll come back to you to discuss some of these issues. Last but not least, Mr. Thomas, over to you.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Panda, for the invitation. Great to be on such an esteemed panel. I almost feel like I'm more of a practitioner. I think my perspective is going to be very different. I came to Sweden about 20 years back, like you said, as part of I would say, the first wave of IT growth, right? So when we think about supply chain, one of the things that we've been exporting to the world are our people for a very, very long time, right? And one thing that I say is changing now is the reverse. If you think about 5 million of us are working within the IT sector, but over 2 million are in what I call as GCCs, which are the global capability centers, where global companies are setting up their centers in India, and that is one of the areas which is growing exponentially over the last few years. And this was primarily set up, I would say, in the past for mostly back office functions and things like that. But today, it is a completely different setup where you are basically going for talent, you're going for innovation, you're going for scale, you're going for completely different reasons as to why you're doing this. So the way I see it, this is one of the areas where I believe it is going to be a huge growth potential and a huge area for exchange across both the countries, right? And if I look at the Nordic companies, I think some of them already have a big presence, like Volvo and Ericsson and Kone and Maersk. I think they all have their GCCs, but I think we will be seeing more and more of this as we go forward. And then if I, so that's from my industry right now. When I look at my clients, and I was, when Per was talking, all the clients you mentioned are my clients as well, Per. And there is a huge spectrum if you take in terms of the experience of these clients going to India, right? Sandvik and Atlas Copco established back in 50s and 60s in India, right? H&M and IKEA are more recent. So the spectrum is huge, right? And also the way that some of these companies are embedded in India and the processes are set up and the way they work are so different. Okay. So I think that is one of the perspectives that we need to keep in mind when we talk about, IP exchange and stuff like that. I mean, when we talk about IP exchange, given that, Sweden and the Nordics is quite high on the innovation index, we need to find a way to facilitate that. And what do I mean by that? I mean, at the end of the day, IP is not sending papers across, right? It's sending people across. And one of the areas that really we need to focus is how do you make it easy? How do you make it easy not just for the expert to relocate to India, but also the expert's family, which is the spouse, the kids, because you're trying to create an ecosystem which will enable an easy exchange. And you need to give them the basis to ground it, right? So some of these things I think would be very good points to consider when we are thinking about, how we facilitate that kind of a process. And then we talked about materials as well, and materials is very important. I mean, I work very closely with IKEA in my role. So one of the things that I would say is, some of the policies that we have in India, they are very much, focused on India, and sometimes they don't really are not in line with some of the global standards, which makes it very tricky for some of the global companies to make India the place where they will produce, right? Say, I mean, you mentioned Sandvik, Dr. Pear. So, like for example, I mean, for Sandvik, I think India is like 2% of their market, right? And why is that? Because for Sandvik to have a big market in India, you need to have companies that will use their tooling, which means that you need to have the Mercedeses, you need to have the Volvos, you need to have, you know, all these big Volkswagen, Scania. You need to have all these companies to really manufacture. Today, most of the stuff that's happening in India is mostly assembly, right? So something that we need to think about is also how do we enable more of that? Because at the end of the day, it is the ecosystem that flourishes, you know? So when we think about, Sweden, India, Nordic, whatever, right? When we think about it, we need to think in ecosystems because that's basically how the world has become. You know, we're super interconnected in terms of the dependencies and all of that. And it would be very important for us to consider how we are able to, you know, bring all of that together. So I think those are some of my initial thoughts, Dr. Panda. And just as a disclaimer, I'll just say that, you know, all the thoughts are just mine. I mean, I don't represent the company. So, you know, being an MD here, I just wanted to state that explicitly on the call. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. I think those are very, very useful remarks. And I think we take it seriously. All these views and remarks that are expressed here belongs to the individual persons, more as a scholar or as a fields practitioner, but doesn't really belongs to their representative organization or institutions. Excellent. So I think a lot of cover areas we have covered, but one very fundamental questions I would like to pose to everyone, probably, and then we can take few questions that are already coming in our way. So I would request each one of you to look at the Q&A box. Then I'll read some of these questions to just pose it direct towards you so that you could answer. One fundamental question is that in your context, when we're talking about traditional supply chain and new supply chain context, in your opinion, how does really India should look towards Nordic and Nordic should look at India when it comes to the new supply chain connect? What are that newness that both the sides should look at, and what should be their distinguished features in terms of connecting with each other? We know there are many aspects that we discussed: infrastructure, energy, technology, artificial intelligence. But then when it comes to India and Nordic, what are those 2-3 areas, prime areas that should become the lead areas of collaborations, following collaborations in other areas or leading to much more serious collaboration in other areas? Maybe would you really identify 2-3 focal areas where we should be really focusing in order to advance India-Sweden, India-Nordic ties ahead? I'll start in the reverse order. Maybe first you, Mr. Thomas, and then Professor Sastaba, then Sari, then Carolina, and then Postam. Over to you, Mr. Thomas.
Okay. Let me start with AI. You know, as a technologist, if I don't talk about AI, then doing something wrong. So let's start with AI, right? I mean, if you really think about it, we had this report where AI for Sweden report, and where it said that, you know, we need to approach it as if it's a crisis mode and we cannot be left behind and stuff like that. And on the contrary, if you look at, you know, where India is, I mean, India is actually quite advanced in AI in terms of at least the rankings, the global rankings, right? Because fundamentally, where India has made a difference in AI is in terms of democratization of AI. Okay, and I think that is something that we can really learn, right? If you just take the example of this thing that Bashi, right? Which is basically where you have real-time Bashini, right? Where you almost have real-time translation in 22 languages and you have access to everything. So essentially what you've done is you've taken it to the grassroots level. Again, to your point, Carolina, right? You've taken it to the grassroots level, you're enabling people, right? And in Sweden, we are super advanced. We are super advanced. And think about all the wonderful things that we do in Karolinska and, with cancer research and all of that, right? We have so many databases. We have so many things that we can actually, create inferences, right? So I think AI can be a fantastic area for collaboration where, we can take a lot of the insights that we have in terms of advanced technologies, research that we have in Sweden. We can take all the fantastic things that we're doing in India in terms of democratization and how we are almost creating it at no cost. You call it Jugaad innovation. There was even a book written on it, right? So this is something that I really believe will enable both countries to completely change the trajectory that we are having in terms of AI adoption. And while we talk about AI, another point which is super important is the energy. Okay, these are super hungry systems, right? And again, coming back to your point, Dr. Sachdeva, where you said that we still are reliant more on coal, and while Sweden is almost 95% on green energy, we need to really think about how can we really change that balance, because at the end of the day, to run these systems, to keep them productive, to do that at scale, you need power. Okay. And it's a very, very important topic for us to consider in terms of, how we are able to, change that equation in terms of the power, because that will drive how we are going to be successful, because that's going to be a limitation.
Thank you. Professor Sachdeva?
Thanks, Jagan. I think he started exactly for the future technology. He know much better, Rajesh, about AI. So, but my understanding is that we do recognize all those possibilities that I think for many years we have been doing together. But where I think most of the Europeans are, or other investors and others also looking at India, where still I think things need to be done. Still, the manufacturing in India hasn't really taken off the way India would like to see. And that's one area, it's not something that there is no recognition. I mean, we had earlier in 2011 a policy to really make India a manufacturing hub. Now, in the last few years, again, the Make in India thing. And then specifically coming with all the production link incentives, which are certain kind of subsidies, whether we do not have a conclusive evidence whether some of them are working or not working. But there is a clear recognition now, because for some time I think there was a thinking that even without a major huge manufacturing base in India, still you can continue to have the growth in services, which I mean it's very useful. So the growth in services is happening. They are also becoming a very important part of India's exports. But ultimately, the social and economic political stability in the country, and also, I mean, to have, if you're talking about those future technologies, whether it's quantum or whether it's AI, etc., only software skills are not enough, because you have to have the basic solid structure of your hardware as well. Because without that, I think there is a recognition that you need to do that. And these are some, and then in fact, once you have that kind of ecosystem where there is a confidence by investors, and they find, because everybody is looking towards India to certain kind of an alternative. I mean, not only because of China, but even otherwise also because India itself is a huge market, and you can create that base here, and that will be very useful for your investment in India, as well as also later on for all kind of exports in whichever sector you are working. So there we are working, and I think that's one area where I would still believe that European and Nordic investments, technologies, collaborations are going to be quite crucial to that. But still, now many of those things would be facilitated by some of the institutional mechanism through the investment agreements or trade agreements and other things, or things which we have been talking about, through which this can be facilitated. But it has to happen. So I think, to me, that's really the crucial part, because once you have that think in India, there's enough number of people who can work, qualified, semi-qualified, unqualified, the kind of people you need really for the manufacturing sector, they do exist. But somehow it hasn't really taken off the way India would like to see. And there, I think the collaboration with Sweden and Nordics and other European countries, I would say, is very, very useful. To me, that's really the key.
Thank you. Sari, what do you?
Thank you. I'd like to start from what Professor Shastevas just said about the hardware shortage and echo that a little bit, because we have the chips problem. We are dependent on Taiwanese and a number of manufacturers that are not ours. And while we are at this, which enables then the AI and technology components and defense sectors and so on, is the hardware. And then again, the minerals where we have low added value is also something that we need, the rare earths. And India has them, Nordics, we have them too, but they need to be refined and maybe there's something that can be complemented. But I'm also a little bit afraid that while we are trying to do the AI leap, then China and US are so far ahead that they will already hop further. And China is already innovating, kind of adapting from the shortage angle and deficiency, what they are lacking. They are trying to hop over that through innovations and create something new. And I think this is really important, that we do not forget to the innovation part that was mentioned here already, new materials, new ways of doing things. I think this is really, really crucial, instead of just trying to catch on somebody else and how they are doing things. But what the question was also about the supply chain connection, what should we be looking at? I think some real strength that India has in pharmaceuticals, maybe also technology components. We have mapped in Finland actually our dependencies on China. I've spoken with companies and I've asked about their dependencies, and they said that they have, for, let's not go into the critical minerals which are everywhere. And we also map that there are certain chemicals, there are minerals that we can't get from anywhere else at the moment. But there are also technological components. And even though these could be supplied from somewhere else, the price is so much higher that this is not done. And then there are also components that cannot be found anywhere else. Nobody else manufactures them but China. And one company told me that if something would happen in the Taiwan Strait, they would be out of business in 3 months. It's a fairly big company. They don't want to keep stock. And even if they did, it won't last forever. So, but if we look at this from the other side, these create opportunities as well. And we know what our deficiencies are and where we have the gaps, the dependency gaps. So this is also actually positive news for engagement and collaboration.
Thank you. Carolina?
Yes, so for me, I think that regardless what topic, I think energy is such a crucial topic, because it's not only necessary for supply chain, or even for building and scheduling the AI or the technology development or any area. So I would probably come that energy and clean energy would be a really good partnership for Sweden and for India, because Sweden has already good knowledge on the grid scale for wind and hydro, for example. We have also the bioenergy systems for industrial applications. And also, I know that India has its really great ambitions to scale up also the nuclear capabilities, which produce, low carbon resilient energy. so I would come to energy and to try to, of course, from my perspective, to reduce the fossil fuel use, and the reasons for that are several. I would come back to both the energy supply and also the independence of being able to have the reliable energy that would reduce. I don't have the figures in my head, unfortunately, but I think that it would also, reduce the reliance of imported fossil fuels up to, I think the number is 85%, but I might be wrong on that one. It could also help to protect from the global energy prices shifting, and also, of course, then strengthen the self-sufficiency for the energy use within the country. And I think that knowledge exchange could be a really good collaboration, because that would not only be of benefits from industry, but also for everything from health reason, from air pollution, from in the long run, even cost competitiveness. And I also believe that having clean energy and abundant of it would contribute, of course, then to the economic growth. So I think I would choose the energy as the number one topic for sure, and not just choose one clean energy source like renewable solar or wind or hydro, but really the mixture of different clean energy sources, because India has really the scale-up capacity to be a major player on the reducing on the fossil fuel use. So I think definitely I would choose energy, because you need the energy for all parts of the society.
So thank you, Carolina. I think that's very useful. Paul.
Thank you very much. I think it's been very important things that has been touched upon, and I'm going to carry on a little bit where Carolina left. I think one of the key areas, I'm not going to point out different industries because I haven't got that type of overview, but where I think it is important for some co-development is actually in the R&D sector, and also in the next step when it comes out of R&D, namely the industrialization, the upscaling of the ideas and the results coming out of R&D. And India has excellent R&D in many areas. I mean, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of talent coming out of India. We see, for example, like Mr. Thomas moving to other areas and bringing their competence with them. So I think R&D is one of the key areas where co-development can happen. And in terms of R&D, of course, being a specialist in raw materials, I think that's one of the key areas. Carolina also mentioned energy. And here I would really like to point out two other things, beginning in one of them. I think where we can really co-develop, and where probably the European countries, so Sweden and the Nordic countries, can have a little bit of a transfer issue, is really the institutions around R&D. How do you set up R&D? How do you fund it? How do you make sure that you have pathways from R&D to industry, so on and so forth? When it comes to clean energy, I very much agree with what Carolina mentioned, but also what Professor Sajiva said, that we really must take the basis for energy generation as the foundations there. And I think one area that has been overlooked to some extent is really the CCS, carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and utilization. And here we really need some form of global agreement to create a level playing field, because it will increase the cost. But to be able to increase the energy output of a lot of global South countries, we need to use coal. That is absolutely the case. But we cannot afford increasing CO2 emissions, which means that we need to develop CCS, CCU technology that really can handle this in a cost-efficient and secure manner. So there's really, I think what is pointed out, has been very interesting, is the discussion around AI. Of course, it is something that we will see coming into all sectors, including the ones that I'm in. But something that is also important, not only to create the AI models and the AI hardware, but also the applications, because a lot of the cost reductions, the increased revenues will lie in the applications. And here I think we have excellent excellent industrial companies that can apply this in a very efficient way. And even though Mr. Thomas mentioned that Sandvik, yes, probably the Indian market is a small one for Sandvik, but their research hub in Pune is quite large. It's quite extensive. So I mean, it's not only, and that also points to the fact that you can find in specific areas very high level of expertise in India. So I think that is something that a closer collaboration will have to take place. Finally, when it comes to China, yes, to a large extent, we are today reliant on metals and minerals coming out of China. But we have to remember something. China is heavily dependent on imports of a lot of these. They are world leading at this moment in processing, but they do not have the fundamental raw materials that, for example, India has. So there is a competitive advantage here that we should not forget. And even though, yes, they have the production capacity at this point, production capacity has, it is an experience from not at least the Chinese industrialization, it is not that difficult to copy. And I think what is happening right now in Europe, in the US, I'm sure it's happening in India, I'm not aware of that, is that the copying of industrial capacity, of production capacity, is also leading to a lesser dependence on the production capacity of China. So China is also heavily dependent on a lot of imports of a lot of things. Finally, I had a question I saw in the chat on whether or not India will go down the route of hydro-based steelmaking. I think that depends a little bit on what I mentioned earlier on CCS, CCU. Do we have the energy to create hydrogen? It's not necessarily the case. We might go down the road that Carolina mentioned slightly, namely using a bio-based, mainly bio-waste route. Instead of using low-grade coal, we can use low-grade bio-based and thus create a circular flow when it comes to these issues. So there are alternatives, but I think something that we need to look into and also co-develop is different forms of CCS, CCU. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent, Por. And I think your point about co-development is well taken, because Delhi currently under Prime Minister Narendra Modi is focusing a lot about co-developmental productions, formalities with foreign countries, with overseas countries. And I think rightfully Nordic could be a strong partner in this regard. We have roughly 20 to 25 minutes, and there are 9 to 10 comments already. So I would request each one of you to have a look at the Q&A box so that you could have a better familiarity with the questions. But let me read some of them, and then we'll go for the discussion. So there is a question about, given the recent supply chain disruptions, what are the key takeaways about managing global logistics? What kind of policy reforms can India, Sweden, and all the Nordic countries adopt to build a more resilient supply chain? Maybe I would pose this question to Sari and Mr. Thomas. Probably you two would be fitting, but maybe Por also wants to jump in to this question. That would be excellent. Then there is a question about, are the current differences between the European and India patent regulations an impairment for innovations? How can this issue be solved? Maybe Mr. Thomas and Carolina can take up these questions. Are the different data regulations and empowerment for Indo-Swedish cooperation in the digital sector? Can they be circumvented, or should be parties strive to close the gap between the EU and Indian regulations? For instance, in data sharing for AI and quantum, maybe Professor Sachdeva, you could address this question. Then for Carolina, there is a specific question for you. In which way can India and Sweden cooperate in the safeguard of global biodiversity to ensure resilient supply chain and guarantee food security? Then there is a question from Aniket Bhavdakar. He's asking, given the emphasis on democratization of technology, how can India and Nordic countries, particularly Sweden, collaborate to promote equitable access to emerging technologies while enhancing the resilience and security of their supply chain? Maybe Professor Sachdeva, you could address this question. There is a comment also, there is a question, you mentioned artificial intelligence democratization. What about AI diplomacy, especially human-centered AI principles like transparency, fairness, accountability issues? Is this something Sweden can learn from India or vice versa? Maybe any one of you could answer this question. Then there is a question from Manu Unial. He's specifically asking to Mr. Thomas, to you and to Sari, or anyone in the panel could address this. With China rising geopolitically, what are the three future challenges Indian-Nordic supply chain will be impacted in the next 5 years from geopolitical and geoeconomic perspective? How to address them? Then there is a question, how can the Nordic countries and the EU contribute to alleviating the bottlenecks that China is creating? And what role can they specifically play in supporting India's emergence as a manufacturing alternative and ensuring the diversification of supply chains against this potential geopolitical weaponization? So maybe this Sari can address. Last but not least, again, there is a comment from Mariana from Sweden. She's saying, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. As a Swedish expert on trade policy, who as a governmental expert, I have experienced of negotiation with India already in 1980s. I noticed the skills from the Indian side already then. Our future platform will be free trade agreement between the EU and India. Now I wonder if you expect this agreement to be concluded this year, although there are important problems to be solved, in particular in the agricultural sector, in the pharmaceutical sectors, as well as in the vehicle. Both EU and India have rather protectionist attitude. So maybe this one, Professor Sachdeva, you could address. So what I'll do is that maybe probably we'll go in the same order. Maybe I'll start with Pearl first. You would like to comment on any of these questions, feel free. So we'll keep every one of you maybe 3 to 4 minutes so that we could finish it on time. We have roughly 17 minutes in our hand. Over to you, Paul.
Well, I think most of it has been said, and what you mentioned is really something that I think what I mentioned earlier. I think that there are some clear co-development collaborations available, but outside of that, I don't really have any specific answers to your questions. So when it comes to trade policy, I think there are people much more qualified than me to discuss this in this forum. So thank you.
Sure. So Sari, you have a lot of questions on China and the supply chain network. So over to you.
Thank you. I heard the question about the logistics first, but I'm not sure what logistic this means, so maritime or infrastructure bottlenecks, and I'm not really an expert on that. But I would like to bring out one interesting thing, which is Taiwan, which we haven't talked much about. So there is certain benefit there for India and the Nordics, that in case something happens with Taiwan, and if we're not talking about chips, we are not dependent on those scenarios which would roll out in case we are not talking about some Chinese inputs in the supply chain. So this is sort of an insulating matter in engagement between Nordics and India. What comes to the was it the three future challenges caused by China? So I think if we look at right now, of course, there's the tariffs and this trade war, which will definitely impact India and it will impact Nordics, whether we want or not. And we are not parties in it, but we will be impacted by it. Then China-US technology ecosystems seem to be bifurcating and bipolarizing further, and that's also impacting us, even though we are not direct parties in that game either. Then China will take probably more protective measures that I addressed in the beginning to keep its manufacturing base, maintain the advantages that it has already built. And this means that the sectors that rely on Chinese inputs, there might be retaliation or other countermeasures to protect Chinese manufacturing. So these just came to mind. One is, of course, maritime logistics. US is already taking measures to protect its maritime sector and reindustrialize its shipbuilding and taking measures against Chinese shipbuilders. China owns a huge part of cargo ships around the world. And has a sort of a nearly dominant position in shipbuilding as well. So the US is planning to levy fees on China-built ships that others use or that has Chinese manufacturing in it, and this might make maritime or the cargoes more expensive in the future and more volatility there.
Excellent. Thank you. Carolina?
Thank you. So I will probably start with the one directed directly to me. I think it's an excellent question, and it's probably many answers to this, but I will try to keep it brief. So I think that there is some really good complementary strength between Sweden and India in this to safeguard the biodiversity while still ensuring the food security. Agroforestry knowledge exchange. There is a huge traditional knowledge of biodiversity agriculture systems in India. And I also know that Sweden has some quite advanced certification system and monitoring technologies. So together it could probably develop like climate resistant agroforestry that would both preserve the biodiversity, but also increasing yields at the same time. Of course, maybe joint projects on the seed banking for genetic diversity. We have the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, for example, that you could combine with Indian agrobiodiversity somehow. And I don't know, maybe develop digital tracking on to ensure transparency, germplasm exchange, for example. What else? I should probably write a whole paper on this, but research on climate adaptive varieties, digital platforms. Maybe we could create to share rapid knowledge between different regions. Yeah, I think I passed by 3 minutes already. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Sachdeva.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions. I'll just briefly kind of try to touch 2 or 3, and there are 2 or 3 other points also. One is, in fact, it was very interesting, for decades, or for quite some time, many countries, including India, they were looking Nordic solutions of many things. And Nordic countries were very good in providing solutions or at least suggesting different things how to resolve all over the world, whether there was any conflict, where there was anything else. But what we are seeing is that suddenly, when there is a conflict in Europe, we don't see that Nordics advising to others, please go and talk to Russia, please go and do something. In fact, you join NATO rather than doing something else. Similar, also interesting thing about China. You look at, of course, I mean, the whole world is trying to figure out how to deal with China, and obviously, no country is exception. But is there any Nordic way of dealing with China rather than just the way others are trying to deal with China? Third thing is about you know now President Trump is trying. I mean, he's creating havoc with the whole world trading system and many other systems. Instead of dealing bilaterally, as many countries are doing, Europeans are doing, India is doing, Japan is doing, others are doing, China perhaps will do differently. Is there any way that Nordics or at least within the European Union can really take a lead? How do you really save some of those global institutions and deal with the whole Trump tariff kind of threats uh, collectively? And EU, as a big important player in the global trading system, can take a lead. We haven't really seen those kind of things so far. So there are, I think one has to look into those things, where this whole Nordic, they used to come with the unique solutions, unique ideas. Where are those? Now, questions about this artificial intelligence, data regulations, etc. I'm not really an expert on AI, but what my understanding is that, this is the kind of area in which we are getting into. Regulations are not really going to help us in one. This is a new, industry going, nobody knows how it is going to evolve. If you start with all kind of regulations to begin with, I think countries which are anyway far behind in AI will have a problem. Now, whether this data regulation, I mean, all the encrypted data which is available at the moment, which nobody knows what this data is, but after the way the quantum technology would be available, maybe after a few years or something, and some of this data would be available through that kind of technology. So I don't think really the regulations are going to help us in much way. It's how we are really going to work that technology faster than anybody else. That's really going to be key rather than trying to manage this thing about regulations, etc. And then on India, EU, FTA, there was there was excellent question at the end. Yes, I mean, all these negotiations are obviously complicated. There are issues. That's why, for last more than 20 years, we have not been able to resolve. But now what is really the sense one is getting is that there is a certain desperation in which, again, the deadline has been set. And if you go by, and the way the European Union machinery function, those deadlines are not, it's not like political leaders telling somebody in other individual countries, EU, function very, very differently. So in one way, either we will not be able to, make it by this deadline, or if there is real kind of political hurry to get certain things done, so you might get some kind of a shallow agreement because India is not going to give up on certain things. That's quite clear. And similar thing is also in the European side. So that's why the things are stuck. But if you keep aside those really things and then you get some kind of agreement by the end of this year or a near future, then why we wasted so much time? I mean, this is exactly India was suggesting when the whole thing began in 2005 and later on in 2007 when we negotiation started. Because India was saying go by step approach, do whatever needs can be done first. This is what India did with ASEAN. This is what India did with other partners. Do certain things, in goods first, and then you go for a full agreement, then you get into the services, then you get into the data, then you get into something, mobility, then you get into procurements, etc. Step-by-step approach. That India was suggesting in 2007 itself, which was outrightly rejected by EU. No, that they said, no, this is not the we want. We want really a deeper agreement, comprehensive agreement, which will cover goods and services, which will cover investments, which will also cover data, intellectual property, which will also include procurements, etc. Everything else. Now, if we are not going to get it there, then it means we have really wasted a lot of time. And to me, it looks like to me either we will get it that kind of agreement or we'll still be there. I mean, that's what my understanding about this agreement at the moment looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Mr. Thomas?
And sorry, one more point about this, supply chain. I mean, different kind of, links. I mean, alternative things which can be built. One is, of course, supply chains within the countries. In India could be useful, but then also how connections. I mean, the transport connections and everything else. Now, I think the best thing to me is that it's better to talk more and more different kind of corridors. Because if there is a kind of bottleneck somewhere because of certain difficulties or things are problematic in Suez Canal or somewhere else, we must have between India and Europe and between India and Nordics, etc., different kind of 3-4 options. Now, that options must be made available to businesses. Now, later on, of course, the business will decide which option is better, where they, what really works, what doesn't work, in which particular direction it doesn't work. So I think that between India and Europe and with the other transition, I mean, other countries in between, there is a sufficient, I would say, volumes of trades are available now. So things are possible. And we must talk not just only about IMEC. We have also been talking for many years also about a North-South trade corridor. But now the Europe relations with Russia are bad. So at the moment, those options are not there. But the way things are changing, we don't know. So I think from Indian perspective, whether it's INST, whether it's IMEC, whether other kind of options, I think India will continue to work on all of them to create more and more options of connectivity, also providing India as a kind of alternative source of supply chains. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Thomas?
Okay, so if I just reflect on which are some of the things that would be most disrupted because of China, US, it's clearly electronics. That's one area, technology, everything connected to that, right? And then if I take the lead from what Dr. Pear said in terms of India being rich in minerals, right? And which is basically the raw materials to produce all of this. I mean, what it'll happen is that we have the opportunity to really being an alternative diversified manufacturing hub. So that I think is a significant opportunity which will emerge. And then what you should also look at is the third thing, which is basically the modular production. Again, to say that, when we say that it's much easier to replicate production, and the fact that modular production is an IP that the Nordic companies really excel in, okay? Partnering with companies like, say, LKAB to really look at, how do you extract these minerals more effectively? What can you do there, And then partnering with some of the manufacturing companies to really look at, okay, how do you create those manufacturing hubs and create those diversified manufacturing hubs? I believe, that will be something where we will be really differentiated. And again, going back to R&D, I think that's another core area that we can collaborate on. Again, coming back to the collaboration across universities or research institutes or even within companies, right? And exchanging and creating partnerships in a very different way. So at least for me, those are 3 key areas where we can really make a difference. Then I also saw a question around AI, what Sweden can learn from India, what India can learn from Sweden. I think one of the things is really, if I started by saying that where we what India got right was really about democratization and grassroots and open AI, really having open sourcing some of these things. Okay. So that could be an area where, Sweden can see how do you use it? Can you extend it? Can you create and can you find applications of that in the Swedish and the Nordic context? Another thing, when you think about that level of grassroots enablement of AI, is in terms of how you create, literacy and really upliftment, because that is something that India is trying to do. And how do you apply that to the Swedish Nordic context? You can think about immigration and integration. Okay, you can really think about, okay, can you accelerate how you can upskill, and enable better integration, which will be better for the society and for the country, right? And the third thing, I think one of the things that we can think about is the demographic differences, right? We have a much more aging population here. How can you really think about, geriatric care? How can you think about, technology that can help with Alzheimer's and things like that, which is what the society is kind of, getting towards. So I think, those are some of the things that probably Sweden can pick from India. And if you really think what India can pick from Sweden, I think governance is one of the things we do very, very well. We have fantastic governance models. And AI is something that needs to be governed. It can go rogue very easily, right? So we have to really think about, how do we kind of control that? Another thing which is very interesting is what we do very well in this part of the world is the public-private collaboration. Okay. And the partnership in terms of, really seeing how we can scale some of these new technologies and what we can do and stuff. And we do that very early in the process, right? So that is something that we can really learn. And the third thing, which we really take a lot of pride, is human-centric design, simplistic, clean, neat design, right? And that would be very important in terms of, as we scale the applications for AI and mass usage, to really make it human-centric, to make it easy for adoption.
Thank you. That was excellent. We are already in time, but there is just one last question. We don't want to disappoint our participants who have joined. So Ms. Himanshi Gupta asking, Dr. Storm mentioned about China's vulnerabilities. How can we go about taking it as point of factor for collaboration among the Nordic, India, and China, turning the coin in benefits of humanity rather than just looking China as a threat? Maybe I will pose these questions to Sari. You were talking about China and supply chain. So how we could create a commonality between China, India, and Nordic rather than seeing purely China as a threat? That's an interesting question. Maybe very shortly you would like to comment on.
It's a very good question, but it's also a very difficult one politically, because I think the whole Europe is a bit paralyzed at the moment, waiting what's going to happen between US and China. And as we are sort of dependent on particularly Nordics and the Eastern flank countries on the US security umbrella, we still probably have some hopes that Trump would kind of still offer it for us. At the same time, we are trying to boost our defense capabilities. And China is a kind of a problematic for us, because behind Russia, there's more and more China. China, Russia are partners. Russia is a problem for us as an aggressor in Europe. So this goes down as a very political question. And even though right now there seems to be European countries that see more engagement with China, but at the moment, I think this kind of a triangle where we all would happily cooperate is definitely not yet.
Thank you. That was excellent. And with this, let me thank all of you for finding time today to engage with us in this webinar, sharing your thoughts. I think this has been a very useful interactions. We will prepare a recording of this conversation. We'll put in our website. You could see the recordings of this webinar in a couple of days' time or early next week. We will also continue this dialogue in terms of another round of webinar tomorrow, which will be more discussing about India-Nordic connections, factoring how Sweden can be the bridge. Those who are interested, we would encourage to register and join us same time tomorrow, so that you will have more interesting conversation also on the subject. With this note, let me thank all of the distinguished panelists for joining us today on behalf of ISDP and also in collaboration with the Indian Embassy. We are privileged to have you, and we'll stay in touch for our future events. And also let me offer a vote of thanks to my excellent ISDP support team, Ms. Anna Yarmoth, Tabi, Julia, and Maria, for their excellent support to host this webinar. I wish all of you a very good evening and a good day ahead, and have a good week ahead and good weekend also coming up very soon. Thank you very much, and see you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panna. Thank you to all our co-panelists.
Thank you.
Thank
An
you.
interesting discussion.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.